Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is that you are joining us from. My name is Ian Harkins. I am a premium tutor with Applerouth, and I have been for the last 11 years. That dates me a little bit. And you can probably tell from my accent that I love being part of the international aspect of Applerouth's division. So I'm very, very excited to get to talk today about the digital SAT and its beginning its advent in the international testing sphere. How this is going to work is I'm going to give a presentation, and then I'll save some time at the end for questions. This slideshow, along with the recording of this, will go out to people. So feel free to take notes as we go along for whatever's helpful, but just know you'll get this material subsequently anyway. And then anything that you have a question about, feel free to type it in the Q&A portion, and I'll try to get to it either in the middle of it or in the middle of the presentation, or towards the end in the time that I save towards the last few minutes. So a quick discussion about who we are. Why we do what we do. We very much believe that when you change students' self-beliefs, you are able to change their lives, not just through education, but through all sorts of things that they can then bring to the world when they become adults. How do we do this? We do it through our 3 prongs of academic tutoring, test prep, and executive function coaching. And it is that middle pillar, test prep, that brings us to where we are today. I'm going to divide today into 3 different parts. Hopefully people are somewhat aware of the format of the test, but I think it's important to start there, and so that's what I'm going to do. What are the key things to know about the new test? So it's not just that it is a digital test, it is also changing its format slightly in ways that I'm actually rather enthusiastic about. This is the test structure. There is an initial setup, and then there are 4 different sections. You will start with the reading and writing baseline module. Then you will have the reading and writing adaptive module. I will explain what that is a little bit. Both are 32 minutes, 27 questions. You will then have a 10-minute break, and then you will repeat the exact same thing for the math. You will have a math baseline and then a math adaptive. Both of those are 35 minutes. Both of those have 22 questions. That is a total testing time of 2 hours and 24 minutes. There are Marvel superhero films that take way longer than this test, which is a huge difference from the traditional paper test. Let me say as well about the initial setup at the beginning. Previously, students will have had to go through quite a fair few minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, sitting down and filling out information, even sometimes finding which room it is they belong in. One of the beauties about this setup is that that's all kind of going away as well. When a student signs up for the test, they get a code. It will have all of their information already set. You are able as a student to bring in your own laptop or your own tablet, like an iPad, for example. You are able to request one from the venue. If given, you have to do it a little bit ahead of time. And whatever accommodations that you have in that code initially, so that you don't have to do all of this filling out at the beginning. You punch in that code, and there is your test, and you're off to the races. So when we say 2 hours, 24 minutes, it really is 2 hours and 24 minutes. There's also plenty of opportunity in there for tech support and tech help. Like I said, there will be devices that testing centers that are approved that they'll be able to lend to you, or you can just bring in your own. If for some reason the internet goes out, or there's some kind of tech problem, the test freezes in place. So you have that same amount of time, and then when you come back in, the clock will set up again, and you pick up exactly where you left off. This feels like it takes out a lot of the anxiety surrounding this. You have your own device. You can go straight into the test. It's a shorter test than it is now. You have more time per question than you do on the current SAT, the paper test. So it's really, really advantageous for students in a lot of different ways. And like I said, in ways that I'm quite excited about. Going a little bit more into the section structure. So it's reading and writing. If I say reading, writing, or just reading or English, forgive me, I use all these interchangeably. It's this first part, but it's 32 minutes. There are 27 total questions, like I said. Just letting you know, 25 of those are what the College Board calls operational, meaning those are the actual questions that you are tested on. When you get your report back, you will be graded on your 25 questions, and you'll think to yourself, but I took 27. It's because 2 of those will be experimental, meaning they are using you as the guinea pig, if you will. The expression being they're using you as a test subject to set up subsequent questions in subsequent tests. Then the exact same thing with the math. It's 35 minutes, 22 questions. Notice that 20 of those are operational and 2 questions are experimental. So again, there is going to be no way to tell which questions are the difficult ones. Sorry, not the difficult ones. Which questions are the operational ones and which ones are the fake testing ones. Do your best on every single question. The College Board is using you in order to create a map for subsequent tests so that they can judge what are the easier and harder questions. I'll go into a little bit more of their algorithm towards the end of this. One other thing that it's worth mentioning here is that the reading section does not increase in difficulty. However, the math sections, even within the sections, do. Okay. Oops, forgive me. Let me quickly explain what adaptive sections are. The GRE is what's called question adaptive. There are some other examples of tests out there like that, meaning each correct answer that you give will give you a subsequent question that is increasingly more difficult. This is not quite like that. This is what's called section adaptive. You will be given a baseline English verbal reading section that is of a consistent difficulty level. Then, depending on how you do on those questions, your next section will feel like it will be either the easier verbal section or the harder verbal section. If you score a certain amount and you're funneled into the easier, then theoretically there is a cap. There is a limit on how high of a score you can get. If you're put into the harder section, then there is a floor. There is a limit to the lowest score you can get. Same exact thing for the math as well. Again, I'll go into some more details later on in the presentation about exactly how they judge how to put you into which section. Sometimes you won't initially be able to tell which section you've been placed into. My initial thing is to say, don't necessarily worry about that. Some more detail on some of the changes that have been made. The reading section is the one that has gone through, I think, the greatest change. Every one of the passages now is just one question per passage. We have been used to answering 10 questions per passage. Not anymore. It's short passages, but it is not necessarily easier passages. The reading level is quite high. There are sometimes excerpts from poetry or from more heightened English from the 1800s. There's even a Shakespearean sonnet that we found in a practice, and numerous of challenging scientific passages as well. Something to keep in mind then as well, you will be asked one single question for each reading passage, and you will be expected to jump from topic to topic. So it's not as though nowadays where you'll read one passage and it's about city planning, for example. So great, you have 10 questions that are all about this one passage to do with city planning. This is not going to be that. You can go from a passage about octopuses to a passage about poetry to a passage about bats to a it can be terribly, terribly many different categories. So it will require what they term, the College Board terms, mental agility. However, one thing that is consistent and that is worth mentioning is that this time the question types are grouped together. You are always going to start off with words in context. There'll be the first few questions will always feel like they are vocabulary questions. They're not going to be difficult vocab questions. There used to be an expression, an SAT word would be a difficult word. These are not going to be difficult words. You, as an English-speaking, even as an English as a second language audience, you will have heard these words. It's just about interpreting their meanings in context. You'll then always go to text structure and purpose, cross-text connections, and you will always go down and finish with standard English conventions, transitions, and rhetorical synthesis. So there's always, always, always this consistent pattern of the way in which they ask the questions, the way in which they group together what it is that they're testing you on. To me, that's its own kind of nice and predictable reassurance, because instead of being used to maybe one topic, you can be prepared to answer these types of questions. And it gives away a little bit, what I can do to prepare is to do a lot of these so that you get into a habit, you become accustomed to what it is they are going to ask you and how. Let's talk about something significant with the math. The math now has a lot less of a reading burden. They are intentionally doing this for non-native English speakers. The College Board is very aware that they are becoming the preferred test for international students. And I think a very good thing that they're doing is they are trying to move away from questions that have really an entire paragraph that you have to read in order to answer the question. There are occasionally questions where you need to interpret language, but even then, it's just fewer words per problem. They are trying to test you on cold math. On the digital SAT, only 30% of math items will be in the context of science or social studies or real-world applications. So the frequency of these kinds of questions will be much less. What will be replacing it is these pure math problems. So this is a marked difference from the current SAT and even from the ACT. When they made the current incarnation of the test, they really wanted to have a lot of word problems, but they're finding that it's actually shooting them in the foot, if you will, shooting themselves in the foot. So they're trying to go in the opposite direction and test much more on math. This is a really significant change. I think that it's good, especially given that you are given so much more time per question. So the goal, the thing that you are being tested on much more now is, how do you handle this mathematics problem? Not can you interpret what on earth it is that they're even asking you to do in the first place. So that to me feels like a step in the right direction, especially when it comes to the international market. Something that it's worth pointing out that they said, the math phrasing has been updated. I came across this term, linguistic modification, which is, as I said, they are not only trying to decrease the length of the questions, but they are also focused, the College Board is also focused on deliberately removing colloquial idioms. So idioms are sort of odd turns of phrase or expressions in English that are unneeded and that can make a sentence even more complicated. They're doing this because not only is it hard for some English as a second language students to understand, although I bring that up here because of my audience, but it turned out it was difficult for a lot of US-based students to understand, because not every student from every part of the country has heard the same expressions. I would very often come across an American student just be confused on an expression and say, well, hang on, do they mean to include this data set or not? I don't understand what this means. So there's been a lot of research that the College Board has done to try to get rid of all of this phrasing. And basically, like I've said before, the goal behind all of this is to make the SAT a test about math skill, not reading skill. There are going to be some, but as we've seen in the practice tests, but it is, like I said, not at all the same level as it used to be. So if you have older siblings who might have taken this test, or if you have an old book, the English level for the math is going to be much more straightforwards, let's say, which again, I think is a positive change personally. Now, what's changing as far as the content? A significant thing to point out is there's going to be much more geometry and trigonometry. A lot of the time when I'm working with a student, and even when we have plenty of time, I won't touch the geometry and the trigonometry as topics because it's not worth the investment of time. The current SAT averages roughly 8% of questions in these topics. That's doubling. That's going up to 15%. So if it's meant to reflect much more the level that most students are at. They have, in high school or the equivalent, most students, even internationally, have taken geometry, have taken trigonometry. There have, even in the United States, then there's a lot of discussion about, well, some students take statistics and some students take further calculus. So this is meant to be a more level playing field, a more fair adjustment of what it is students are actually learning, so that they can showcase to colleges and universities through this test what it is that they know. What's staying the same? The content itself is largely unchanged. It is not as if for the mathematics, for example. We are suddenly going to see, it's not as though you need to learn linear algebra and sigma notation and polar coordinates, things that gave me nightmares even as a high school student. So the actual topics that you have been learning in school will stay relevant for this test. Like we said, the number of word problems is decreasing. It's less of a reading burden, but the material is indeed staying the same. The reading and the writing sections, likewise, test on the same material. It's the same types of problems, with the exception of the change of format to shorter form reading sections. Perhaps some things that it's worth saying that are changing is the introduction of poetry. We are unclear if the College Board requires students to know vocabulary that's specific to poetry. Do they expect you to know what a verse is, what a sonnet is? We haven't seen any evidence of that so far, but it's worth mentioning that because that was the case with the College Board's old SAT subject test that used to be in circulation. They did expect you to know that. So I'm not prepared to say one way or the other. And it's also worth saying that the evidence-based questions, which would be on the current test and the paper test, these question pairs, they would ask a question, and then the subsequent one would say, where do you see the best evidence to the previous question? Those types of questions are also gone. You won't see things like, how does the first paragraph relate to the last paragraph? And you won't see questions to do with multiple passages. So the author of passage A would most likely respond to the criticism from the author of passage B with what remark? Nothing like that anymore. It's just one passage, one paragraph, one question about it. Otherwise, the question types are indeed remaining the same. And the scoring is remaining the same. So that 800 maximum score, that 200 minimum score for each section for a total of 1600. That's really the SAT's brand. And that indeed is staying the same. Now, it's worth mentioning as well that the College Board is indicating that students should score similarly on the paper and digital versions of the test. And they have some data that they claim will back this up, and they will release the data that they have gathered for people to check its validity later on this calendar year. If those scores are truly equivalent, which I have every reason to believe the College Board on this, it is in their interest to make it the same, because then colleges and universities will find it more valuable, and they will be able to correlate those with the ACT scores. So again, colleges and universities want to know that it didn't necessarily matter which test a student took, the ACT or the digital SAT. They can look at it and say, okay, a 34 on the ACT means this score on the digital SAT. They want to be able to do that. And so the College Board really wants to keep a consistent level for their paper and their digital tests. So again, I think that their business model depends upon their getting this right. So I do have faith that they're doing that. I apologize for the sound of a crying, hungry baby in the background. So that was all part one. Part two, what can I do to prepare myself for the new test? There is still plenty. Let me go into that. Please, 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 if there is one thing that you do, it would be to download the Blue Book app. Right there is the link where you can do that. The Blue Book app is the application that the College Board is using to administer their test. It contains the test, and it will show you all of the features that you have available to you on the test. You'll also be able to see how the application stops you from running other applications so that you can't cheat in the middle of it. And it's just, the first time that you experience the Blue Book app should not be when you take the official test. It's there, it's available, it's how they administer their practice tests. Why wouldn't you do it? So please, please, please have a look at it. The download requires some fairly straightforward features on your computer or your tablet. Have a look and, even decide for yourself, do I prefer using my tablet or do I prefer using my laptop? There'll be plenty of people at the College Board whom you can reach out to for help if something goes wrong. And it's better to make sure that there aren't any problems now. Then, for the math section, my goodness, Desmos is a calculator that has been freely available on the web for years now. The College Board has integrated Desmos into the Blue Book app, and it makes such a difference for the math test. Again, it levels the playing field. It gives so much more equality to students, because now students have had to bring in their own calculators. And yes, the College Board puts a limit on how much those calculators can do, but even then, there are tons of different calculators that you can have available to you that can do different functions that students will have different familiarity levels with because of whatever they had to do in school. Well, now you don't bring in your own calculator. You all just have access to this graphing calculator that's called Desmos. So I said, if you could do one thing, it would be to download the Blue Book app. If you could do a second thing, please get familiar with Desmos. You don't have to have Blue Book to have a look at it. It's freely available on the web. And like I said, it will fundamentally change the experience of taking the test. You can use it for every single math question. It will remain there as long as you like for the entirety of the math sections, if you would prefer it to be. And again, Desmos is right there, easily available on the screen, does not require batteries. It's extremely convenient for problem solving. And a lot of the questions, I think, are written now in such a way where they expect you to have Desmos next to you and to have a facility with using Desmos, a familiarity with using it. It's worth mentioning as well what other digital testing tools there are. There are a series of them built in. A testing timer. It will be on the top of the screen. It will show how much time is remaining per section. You can show it, you can hide it as you prefer. You'll get an alert when time is nearly up. You're allowed to, depending on how different students like to work, you can pop it open for a second and close it. You can leave it there the entire time, so long as it doesn't stress you out too much. There's a reference sheet of commonly used formulas for the mathematics section, which you can easily open and close. Right now, there is still a reference sheet for some formulas on the SAT. You have to flip back to the beginning of the section in order to find it, and then flip back to your question. I can't tell you how many students that I have right now who are taking the paper test, the traditional test, who look at a question and say, oh, but there's no way I could know what the formula for the volume of a cone is. I'm like, flip back 3 pages, it's right there. And they're like, oh, I forgot it was there, I never use it. Well, here you have a reference sheet. And again, these will be the formulas that you'll be expected to know. So gone is the era of having to flip back and forth to the reference sheet. Now it's just there and freely available, which lowers my blood pressure. It's very easy as well to keep track of progress and flagged items. This is a screenshot that one of my colleagues took when he was taking the test as practice. So this, for example, question 4 will communicate, I skipped this question. Question 6 says, I answered it, but I'm not sure about it. Maybe go back to it. And like I said, this will, it will lead, if for some reason the internet went out right here, all of this progress would be saved. So again, really, really convenient for that. So I feel like, again, when you're done, traditionally now, when you're done with a section, you have to flip back. You don't have to do that anymore. You have this tool available to you. This is a huge one for me. I think that the College Board has really gotten this right. They have the ability to, you as the student have the ability to annotate. And what I would ask students is to really, really feel comfortable as well with this. You can highlight, you can write your own notes, you can, you do have scratch paper, hard paper next to you, but again, something that you can do for yourself is to figure out different ways. I'm sure if you've taken some of these tests already that are on paper, you feel very comfortable, and we teach quite a lot of active reading, writing things down, scratching out answers for different reasons. There's no reason not to continue those habits on the digital SAT. In fact, I think it's vital to. Just because it's on a computer doesn't mean you have to completely change your tactics, your strategies. So what I would love is for some of these helpful things for you that maybe you've used with us, with other tests you've taken, or that you use in school. What helps you there can continue on this test. It's very well outfitted for people who use those kinds of strategies, okay? Something else that you can do, the practice tests have arrived. As promised, back in October, the College Board released 4 much-awaited, full-length digital practice tests. And those, again, you can take through the Blue Book app. So there's plenty of what we expect fully that in the coming months, they'll release even more. So, it will be wonderful, wonderful, wonderful to see all the different types of questions that they have. They have also released 4 linear paper tests. So these are not section adaptive. They're just regular, consistent bank of questions. So we can continue to see at least the format and the types of questions that they ask, the things that they expect you to know. So there's a total of 8 practice tests that are officially sanctioned by the College Board. We likewise are going to, in the coming weeks, release our own bank of questions. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity for students to find practice. And again, remember, the actual content of the test isn't changing. So the stuff that you have been studying is still worthwhile. Just to mention, these tests are static. So all students will see the same practice items and practice sections. The official tests will be dynamic. I promise, talk a little bit more about that later on. Here is where you can find the 4 linear practice tests. These are the ones that don't adapt. They're just consistent. But again, they're right there. And isn't that wonderful? Or you can just Google SAT linear practice tests and they will appear. So I hope that those portions have been helpful. So I have added this part 3. so that I can now talk about some things that I have found when I've taken some of these practices, and what I think it would be useful to keep in mind psychologically while taking this test. First of all, should I take this test? I understand that international students are taking this an entire year before American students are. But nonetheless, there have been quite a lot of practice, administrations, quite a lot of research done into this. You can go onto different Reddit forums like we have and see what what students' experiences has been like. And I think that the consistent message that we are getting is that students do indeed prefer this test. It is a better experience. It is shorter. It is more straightforward than some of the other tests that we're used to. It's clear what you're being asked to do. For those, and you're given more time per question, so it's less stressful. You will, in theory, get your scores back much quicker, within days rather than weeks. So there's quite a lot of advantage to this test. From a personal standpoint, I like this quite a lot. I think that, we're in the 21st century. It's 2023. Digital adaptive tests are a great way forwards, and they are able to give just as an accurate, if not more accurate, picture of what it is a student can do. Again, apologies for the hungry baby. Let me also talk right here about the question setup, because I don't want anybody to be confused. When you are in the middle of a test, if you're able to peek and have a look at your neighbor's test, your neighbor's screen, you will, I guarantee you, see a completely different question. So this is not supposed to be like the paper tests where you can glance over and see, oh, they answered A. They're going to have a completely different question with a completely different arrangement of answers. You are taking a unique test that only you are taking. I like it again because it's so much more secure. I think that this is going to really cut down on all of these things that we hear about of tests having to be cancelled for some kind of security breach. So, when you want to showcase what you can do, this is a much better way to do it. And finally, there's something that I would like to send everybody an article about. So I've just put into the chat an article, but let me summarize what it says. There might be a temptation or a worry, depending on how you strategize, if you take the first baseline section and then you go into the next section, the adaptive section, and it feels suddenly easier, or it suddenly feels too difficult, and you feel like either out of your depth, or you feel, oh no, I've been given the easier section. Do not guarantee that, because what the College Board has come out and said is that they do not weigh each question the same. There is an algorithm that they are very, very proud of, and that they will release more information about later on this calendar year, that is able to give different levels of importance to different questions, to try to expose students to different topics and see how they do on them. And in general, so the takeaway message is, do not try to strategize to, play some kind of gambling game on how best to tackle each question. It's like, oh, I'm going to try to get some questions wrong here so that I'm placed in the easier section, or, oh no, I've been given the easier, these questions all feel easy, I've been given the easier one, I must get a terrible grade. You don't know any of that. Answer the question that is put in front of you. And it's not going to be, oh, I got 5 questions wrong, therefore I got this score. Each student could get 5 questions wrong, 10 questions wrong, and walk away with a completely different score, because the algorithm weighs different questions and different topics differently. I'm sorry that I can't give you more information than that. They will, like I said, come out with even more information. I think they've promised that they will more in the autumn, in the fall. But one thing that has emerged that is clear: it is not worth your time, your energy, your mental capacity to fret, to worry in the middle of the test about, oh, should I be trying to deliberately miss some questions? Or, oh no, I can already tell I'm doing terribly and I'm only halfway through the reading the English section. It's not going to work like that. The philosophy that we have at Applerouth and that we are advocating for all students is to do your best with the question in front of you. Okay. And I felt very, very important for me to add that, because I think there's going to be rightfully, I'm not saying this is wrong, but some students will feel worried about different things, about scoring. We are so far away from that. And if anything, the College Board is trying to tell us as clear as they can, it's not worth worrying about that. You cannot dissect what the algorithm is testing you on, how the algorithm is grading you, what questions it's even going to give you. So again, do your best with the question in front of you. All right. Again, thank you very, very much for coming. We are going to throw up a quick poll on the Zoom, just so that we can get a sense of who you are, where you're coming from, how we can best serve you afterwards. If you've got any questions that I didn't get to and we don't get to in the Q&A, please feel free to message us and we will get back to you. Our number is +1 if you're calling into the States, 866-789-7737. Again, these are the 3 pillars of what we do: academic tutoring, test prep, and executive functioning coaching. And at this point, I would love to open it up for any questions the group has, for anything that I maybe didn't get to. Oh, we've already got a question. The question asks, what if you get the harder math adaptive module, for example, and you get more wrong than you would have gotten with the easier module? Isn't it unfair? That would be unfair if, again, they weighted every question the same. So what we do know, thank you very, very much for the question. So again, what we do know is this: if you are put into the harder math adaptive section, you definitely have a floor. You have a limit, like I said, beyond which you cannot fall, because you've gotten all of those questions correct already in the baseline. But what's also clear is that you can take the, let's call it the easier math section, and you can miss 2 questions, and you can take the harder math section and you can miss 10 questions. It's clear, though, that the person who is put into the harder level and misses 10 questions may very well be given a better score than the person who's put into the easier section and misses 2 questions. Again, it's not as though every question is weighted the same. So it's not like now 1 question off means you drop a predictable amount of points. And it's not as though every question is the same either. You know, to be clear, there's something in that article that I sent you that sort of suggests that a certain type of question might be 10 points off. Another type of question might be 30 points off. So again, that's 2 people each missing 1 question and getting a different score. You know, for example, I don't know those numbers exactly, but they certainly suggest that something like that is happening. So again, it's a strange new world that we're going into. The College Board's attitude is, yes, a little bit paternalistic. It's a little bit, trust us, we know what we're doing. But we have seen different testing companies have success with adaptive questioning, and that they do correlate with performance in colleges and universities. Again, there's a lot riding on the College Board for them to get this right. They have been trying to do this for years and years. So I do have faith that this is something that they have worked on and something that they will release even more information about. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, folks, thank you very, very much. Again, if anything else comes up, I am only too delighted to field those questions. If I don't know, there's going to be somebody at Applerouth who does. So again, my name is Ian. Thank you so, so much. Best of luck to everybody who is, first of all, deciding on whether or not to take this test, and then who does take this test. We are only a few weeks away, or 2 weeks away from the first official incarnation of this test, and there'll be many, many more to come. So thank you very, very much. It's been my pleasure to be with you this morning, afternoon, evening, again, wherever you are. And I look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you very, very much. Bye-bye.